Open our lips, O Lord, that our mouths might proclaim your praise. Amen. I would like to begin this morning with some thanksgivings. First, for your hospitality to my wife Becky and I when we got here Friday night, and this past weekend to Cal and to Elizabeth and Lisa, who did all the logistics to make sure we could be here, and details for your welcome of us into this community. The second thing I want to say thank you for is when I was speaking with Bishop Brian about coming here, you could hear over the phone his affection for you all. He said, "Oh, you're going to Good Samaritan. You're going to love those folks." I mean, he as he talked about you and your life as a faith community, your life in the city of Knoxville, you could just hear this sense of appreciation and gratitude for who you are and the way that you carry out your life. It was wonderful to listen to. I want to also say just a couple words about your bishop. Cal mentioned on Friday night that Brian and I worked together at the Cathedral of All Souls in Asheville, North Carolina. He said I was Brian's boss, and I quickly corrected him, and I said, no, it was a very mutual ministry, and I wasn't being just kidding or cute. I really mean that. I'm going to say some things about your bishop that you already know. You are incredibly fortunate to have someone who is as thoughtful, as prayerful, as considered about things as your bishop, someone who is realistic about life and hopeful, someone who can look at things and listen to things and appreciate all folks. When we worked together, I greatly loved his counsel. And as I've been able to hear things through time, I appreciate what he's bringing to you. But what I realized as I talked to him and talked to Cal, I realized that that sense of mutual ministry that I felt with Brian, as your bishop, is something that he feels with you, and I trust you feel with him. That there is a sense of all of you being in ministry together, and you feed him just as hopefully and as I sense he feeds you. And so for the way that you all are in life and ministry together, and for the way that Good Samaritan is truly a light in this community and truly a light in the heart of your bishop, I give much, much thanks, much gratitude for that. This is from Paul's letter today. He writes, "I pray that you may know what is the hope to which Christ has called you. What are the riches of God's glorious inheritance?" I think what Paul's trying to say here is that, folks, all of this, all of our life as faith communities, all our life as people, as families, all of it is so that we might know the hope and the riches that are ours in God, as people of God. And he's saying that like past tense. This hope and this riches are yours now. And my prayer is that you will see this and experience this and know this. And that you will know all of this so that you can live from it. He's calling that out to them. He's saying, know what resides in you. Know what is in your being, what God has given you. And live from that. This is who you are. Live from that. And Luke's gospel is really doing the same. Luke is saying, know who you are. Know that you are beloved of God. Know that you are the beloved people of God. Luke's also very honest about their life. Some of the joyous chapters and some that are not. Not all of life is going to be smooth and easy. And know who you are. Know that you are in the very heart of God. And when you do that, then you will be filled. Luke's Beatitudes are different than Matthew's. Probably heard this in a sermon before. Matthew says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Luke just says, blessed are the poor, period. That's a tangible thing on Luke's part. He's not talking about those who feel, one thing or another. He's saying, blessed are those who tangibly are poor. He's saying, blessed are you when you tangibly are hungry, because you will be filled. And Luke is saying, when you know your connection to God, then whatever seasons you're in, you will be filled as a people. It's why he can say then, therefore, I'm telling you, pray for your enemies, love your enemies, pray for those who abuse you. Now, a sidebar here. I don't know if any of you have ever noticed that praying for your enemies is really a trick. Have you ever noticed that? I mean, Jesus is saying, pray for your enemies. And on the surface you think he's saying, pray for their well-being and pray. Well, what I realize over time is that when I pray for my enemies, what happens is they don't typically change, and maybe they're not supposed to, because my enemies, as Anne Lamont says, if you ever find out that your enemies and God's are the same, something's wrong. So, what I find in praying for my enemies is that God's like saying, crack your heart. Open up your heart. That changes us, and it's like a trick. Pray for them. Well, what's happening is we're getting transformed. And Jesus is saying, and Luke is saying, this is what happens when you know who you are. When you know you are the beloved of God. You can pray for those who harm you, who speak ugly of you. You can love your enemies, because it's in you. Know who you are, the beloved of God, the possessors of God's hope and riches, and live from that. When I was in high school, I participated in our school's wrestling team. We had a coach, Chuck Hansen, who was much beloved by all of us. When he retired, the former wrestlers had a reunion and gathered to honor him and tell him what he'd meant to us. It was a beautiful, beautiful evening. And he really was as much a Zen master as he was a wrestling coach. What I mean by that is, God bless him, and God bless any of you who are high school teachers or coaches of high school people, particularly high school boys. I can only speak from that experience, so I'm not saying girls are different. I'm just saying, think about what high school boys are. Massive adolescent security merged with testosterone. What could go wrong? I mean, come on, what could go wrong? We should walk around like warning labels on us. And what I used to say to my daughters, give them till about age 23 or 25, honey, just hold on. And Coach knew that about us. And he was this Zen master, and he practiced that with us. And here's what I mean. We would have practices during the week, like all teams do. And he would just work our tails for a couple of hours and just make us exhausted. And then at the end of the practice, he would have us line up against the wall of the practice gym. And he would talk to us 5 or 10 minutes. We were tired, our defenses were down. We're like, whew. And it would be different on the days. If it was early in the week, he might talk about the match that had happened the weekend before and what did we learn from it. If it was on Thursday, he might be talking about the match that was ahead of us and what were the challenges. But during the week, he would talk about life. And he would talk about respect. And he would talk about integrity. And what it meant to be a part of this community that was this wrestling team. And how it was that we carried out what we did, whether we won, whether we lost, whether we got cheated, whether we felt we got cheated, whether we benefited from a bad call against the other, whatever, that we operated from a place of respect and dignity at all times. Because that's who we were. There was one match my junior year where we were wrestling our arch rivals. We were Glenbrook North, they were Glenbrook South, and they were always spirited competitions. The towns were right next to each other, we hated them, they hated us, we did not pray for them, I will continually tell you that. They didn't pray for us, I'm sure, too, so I guess it was mutual. And we knew a lot of folks from high school, but it was always very spirited. And towards the end of my match, I was comfortably enough ahead that I did a couple of moves that were not designed, I can't really call them dirty on one hand because they wouldn't have gotten you penalized, right? Yeah, this is my adolescent mind channeling right here. But they were designed to impress my teammates by kind of inflicting some pain on my guy, like just putting your elbow in the right place in the guy's back or something like that. That were just intended to not get you penalized, but to kind of say to your buddies, yeah, I own this match. Yeah, I know, I'm not proud. And I'd like to say I really have no longer do that, but every so often my wife has to say, will you stop channeling your inner adolescent? Come back to who God knows you to be. And so I was doing that, and when you finish a match, if you've ever wrestled or know, when you finish your match, you walk off the mat and you go back to your chair on the bench where your team is, and the coach is standing with the next guy up, talking to him, getting him ready, get out there, good luck. Well, this day, my coach, as I was coming off the mat, I looked over at Nick, the guy who wrestled after me. The coach wasn't next to Nick. That was my first sign that something was not right. The second was that a few feet away from Nick, my coach was standing there making this little gesture. Like, come over here, kid. And I'm like, oh, dear Jesus, Joseph, Mary. I know what's coming. I am just going to get reamed. I'm going to have like a hole from this ear to this ear as he chews me out and talks about what did you just do in terms of this team and this school and your buddies and how do you represent them, and I knew it was coming. So what he did was he walked me behind the stands where no one could see us. And I'm thinking, it's really going to be bad. He doesn't want anybody seeing what he's about to do. And we walked behind the stands. And instead of chewing me out, he puts his hands on my shoulders and he looks me right in the eyes. He says, Donatelli, you are better than that. And he turned around and walked away. Now, I didn't know what to do with that. Had he just said, you cretin, you horrible person, the psalmist, I am a worm and no man, and he could have said all that, and I just said, you're right, I'm just a horrible person, coach, I'm sorry, I'm just terrible, and gone back to my seat and felt terrible. But I don't know what to do with that, because I'm like, do you really think I am better than this, coach? And what he was doing was he was doing a Paul and Luke. He's saying, Donatelli, know what's in you. That's not who you are. There is something in you that is better than that. Live from that. And just walked on off. Know the hope and riches in you, Donatelli. Know the hope and riches that are in you, Good Samaritan. And live from that. Because this is where life is found. Knowing who we are, knowing our inheritance, and practicing these things, praying for enemies, and all the baptismal vows we're about to talk about. Practicing these things so that we will find and know and experience the hope and riches in us. It's what All Saints' Day is all about. Knowing what's in us, knowing the hope and riches and practicing them, naming our inheritance, and naming that one of the things about our inheritance is the communion of saints, this mystical thing we talk about, the communion of saints. The communion of saints, right here. These who are your people and you are theirs. And we are still connected to these folks. And all those folks who've gone before us, all those ancestors, they're right here with us, in us, living in us. Why we say in the Eucharistic prayer at the burial, in death life is not ended but changed. And I don't know about you, but if there's psychologists out there, just hold on a second, but I still have some conversations with a lot of those who've gone before me. Because they're there, and I need their wisdom, and I need their comfort, and I need their companionship. And we live in this communion that exists right here and right there. The communion of saints, our hope and our riches, we who are the beloved of God. I mentioned Friday night, we talked some about interconnectedness and how I love that the sciences are finally catching up to religion, because it usually isn't that way. It's very rarely that way. But that the sciences are saying, we're all interconnected. And that I realize, I'm starting to think that All Saints is our feast of interconnectedness. We call it the communion of saints, but it's the feast that says everything's connected. It's all connected. And it's why we baptize on this day, because we are talking about who we are and in what we live and what we're called to practice so that we know those riches and those hopes. Baptism proclaims our connectedness, and our vows are the practices that help us to experience our hope and our riches, finding who we are in God. As I think about our practices, our baptismal vows, our practices calling forth that which is in us, I'm reminded of a friend of mine in Asheville. He is the retired senior pastor of First Baptist Church in Asheville. And if you've ever been to Asheville, it's this beautiful domed church. It's right in the heart of downtown. And his name is Guy Sales. And Guy, we kind of joke, I say, Guy, you're a closet Episcopalian. You really are. Because, they do the liturgical calendar there. They do all kinds of stuff, But he also talks about practicing the dignity of every human being, one of our vows. And there was a way that he did that tangibly. During the week, one day a week, during his lunch hour, he would walk around downtown Asheville. And when he would see anybody downtown, he would just simply hold them before God, be with them, bless them. The church is near the courthouse. If he saw lawyers going in or out of the courthouse, he would hold them up. If he saw people coming in or out of the courthouse with whatever kind of countenance they might have, whatever day that was for them, he would simply hold them. If he saw people going to a business meeting at one of the many restaurants, if he saw someone without a house sleeping in the park, he would just hold them before God. If he saw tourists who kind of flood Asheville and pay for a lot in Asheville, I'm not complaining. If he saw people that were having a really difficult day, what he didn't do was try to prescribe a prayer. Oh, God, help them to do such and such, or God, you know. But instead he said, I would just hold them before God and say, God, be with them, bless them. Because what he realized was, he said, that changed how I see people. Because what it's been doing for my brain and heart and soul is, instead of just my first impressions where you see someone and go, well, what's wrong with them? He said it pushes me to that, what Richard Rohr calls the second thought, beloved child of God. And I don't know about you, but too often I start with the first one. Oh, they must need this, or they must need that, or they're not doing this correctly, or they're I don't know. Who knows what people are wrestling with? Who knows what joys, pains? All we are called to do, and what God did, was just hold people before God. And he said, it just changes the way I see people. I less and less start with judgment. Instead, I see them as connected to me. Practicing what's in us so that we know and experience the hope and the riches of God. In a moment, we're going to take David Walter, and we're going to bring David Walter up here towards the altar area. And the priest is going to take David Walter from Caitlin and Dave. And that's not a coincidence. That's not just, oh, we got to do this to do the baptism. That's intentional, because what the priest is doing is saying, I'm sorry, this child is no longer yours. You get to raise this child, but let's remember, this child is God's. The child belongs to God. And this child belongs to this community who's just made some vows for this child. You will get this child back. Yes, it's yours, but in the mystery of paradox, it is not yours and it is yours. And we will take David, and we will hold David before God, and we will mark him with oil and say, you're sealed in baptism, marked as Christ's own forever. Period. Sorry, David, you can't change it. Because it's not about us. It's Jesus who said, you're mine. And there's nothing you can do to break that. You are beloved by Jesus, by God, by the Spirit, forever. We'll put a period on that in just a moment. And then we will say, as a congregation, join us in this priesthood that we all participate in. Join us in living out our inheritance. Join us in living out the riches and hope that's in us and is in you. David, know what is in you and live it out with us. Next Sunday, you're going to do something very similar with your pledge cards. You're going to bring those to this altar, and you're going to carry them up to the altar to remember that all that we are, all the stuff, all about who we are, that those cards are outward and visible signs of saying, this doesn't belong to us, this belongs to God and to this community. And you're going to put that card on that altar as an outward and visible sign of that. Yes, God has given it to us to work with and be with, but it is God's. It is this community's, all of who we are. And we find our life when we offer ourselves to God and to each other in this way. You make your pledges not simply to pay the bills. That's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. Your vestry, your rector, but it's really naming who we are and what we're about. We belong to God. David, Good Samaritan, the city of Knoxville, this whole planet, it all belongs to God, and we are all part of it. And we hold it before God, reminding ourselves of that. This is who we are. This is how we will live. For when we know that our foundational identity is saint of God, beloved of God, then gratitude will shape our lives. When we know that we are irreversibly connected to God, then we can love others as we love ourselves. When we live from gratitude for our belovedness, we will be filled. And when we live from the interconnectedness of all things, the hope and riches of God are ours. Amen.